Finding clarity after a toxic relationship is one of the hardest things for people to do because your mind has been put inside of a fog. A fog in a toxic relationship will appear as like brain fog, will appear as confusion, will feel as like just generalized stuckness, right? Like there's a piece of where you don't know what to do, feels like decision making seems harder than it normally would be. It just feels like you are stuck. This can be mentally, emotionally, even physically in a toxic relationship. And so when we talk about finding clarity, this piece gets dicey because you think, I don't even know how to find me, much less any clarity about what I want, the direction I need to go, the decisions I need to make. Clarity seems to be gone in your life. When we bring up the piece of clarity in fog, I want you to consider that some of the fog that you're in right now is based off of fear. It's based off of fear of you don't know what he's going to do, how he's going to respond, how he's going to react. You also don't know what he's going to do in the future. So there's a fear of like what could happen. There's a fear of how are you going to survive. There's a fear of how are you going to provide. What's going to be the next step? Will you ever find someone that loves you? Like all of these fears will come out that just leave you stuck, like frozen in time, not willing to make decisions simply because it's scary. There's also the obligation. When we talk about the fog, it's got fear and then it's got obligation. Yes, we're spelling fog. Fear, obligation, and there's one more. And the obligation piece oftentimes looks like you being stuck out of obligation of, well, we've been through so much versus he's put you through so much. We've been together so long. And this is a piece that you just keep playing. Well, we've been through it so long. We've got the kids, all these things. You feel obligated to stay because of what he might do, because of what he might say, but also just there's an obligation of the time invested. You might think, well, I mean, it's been this long. Like, why do something different? Maybe this is just where I need to be. This is just my plot in life. The third piece inside of it is guilt inside of the fog. And so fear, obligation, and guilt. And inside the guilt, it might be the guilt of staying, the guilt of being in the relationship, the guilt of how it's impacted you in such a negative way and you don't want to look at that, or how it's impacted the kids in a really negative way and you don't want to look at that. There's multiple levels of guilt that sometimes will just leave you stuck in this fog. Well, the fog leaves you stuck in a place where you don't have clarity. You're not able to actually see. So when we talk through how do we part the fog, how do we actually clear through the fog so you can see clearly, so you can actually have clarity of mind knowing what's going on, we have to be able to slice through this by looking at the story that you're telling yourself. Now, I talk a lot about the story you're telling yourself because it runs you. It is the biggest piece in your life because it makes up you. You are the story that you're telling yourself. So whatever you're telling yourself on a day-to-day basis, that's who you are. Simply put, like when you say a story about you, that's who you become. Or that's who you already are. And you're just reaffirming it. But when you're in a toxic relationship, all those stories get like put in a blender and like mixed all up. Confused, in the fog, lost, frustrated, stuck. All of these stories get extremely confused. And it's our job to help liberate your mindset. So what I want you to consider for a moment is I want you to consider what's the story that you're telling yourself. It could simply be something about you not being good enough for him, you not being capable, you being worthless because that's what he told you. And just I want you to sit with it and even just write it down. So take out a piece of paper and I want you to write down the thought that's coming. Now, you might have multiple stories. It's totally fine, but we're just going to pick one. What is the story that you're telling yourself? What's the thought that's going through your head? Imagine for a moment you're thinking, well, I'm not good enough for him. That's an original story that right now you can look at, you can believe, and you can say, okay, let me write down some evidence that proves it. Because we have to teach your mind how to be able to step out of a situation and learn how to actually reframe the situation so you can find clarity. And when we reframe the situation, it's like we're looking through a window. We're looking through a window and we're saying, okay, if we look through this window frame, what are we seeing on the other side? And then we'll turn and we'll look throughout another window frame and we'll see what are we seeing out of this side. And then we turn and look out another window frame and we look through and we say, what am I seeing out of this side? Doing this starts to shift your perspective. It starts to reframe the story that you're telling yourself. So you might have a story that says, I'm not good enough for him. Simple story. Very common. But a simple story that resonates with you saying, okay, if I was good enough, then stuff would have been better. But I'm not good enough because that's how he treated me. That's what he told me. That's how he showed me by his actions. That's why he cheated on me. And you start listing out all of the evidence to actually prove that that's true. proving that you're not good enough. Now, bear with me because it might sound weird. You're like, this doesn't feel good. It's not supposed to right now. But the first thing is we're looking at what is the original story you're telling yourself, because we want to help you reframe it. And in reframing, what we're trying to do is just change your perspective. This means we have to sometimes make a drastic shift in a different direction just to pull you uncomfortably away from the actual story that you've been telling yourself for such a long period of time. So if we look at this story, I'm not good enough for him, and then you compile a ton of evidence. You write down 5, 10, 20 things that would be evidence of that story being true, showing you that you could believe it. It could be 100% true. But then we need to take a pivot. And when we take this pivot, we actually move and look out a different window frame. And we take the original story, I'm not good enough for him, and we switch it in the me version, which basically flips the story back onto you. And when we flip the story back onto you, instead of it saying, I'm not good enough for him, you just switch the person. And you say, he's not good enough for me. Different, right? Might seem weird, might seem odd. But then you write that down, and then we start listing out what is all the evidence that supports that to be true. And I just want you to imagine you're looking through a window frame, you're looking through a picture frame, and you're saying, this is going to be true for this moment. We're not saying it has to be true. We're not saying it is true. We're just saying in this moment, it's going to be true. And if it is true, what's all the evidence I can put down? You start writing evidence, 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 evidence. So we've got the original, I'm not good enough for him. Then we've got the me version, which is he's not good enough for me. And then we go into the third window frame. When we move into the third window frame, we're doing the opposite of the original. So the original was, I'm not good enough for him. The opposite would be more along the lines of, I am good enough for him. Like, I am good and loved and valued. I have worth. All of these can be different pieces encompassing that story. But we're just going to use it really simple of, I am good enough for him. And then I want you to put the evidence for that. You're going to write down evidence, evidence, evidence. This is how I've been good to him. This is how I've shown up. This is how I've helped him. This is what I've done in the relationship. This is how I've done in life. This is my value that doesn't depend on him. Like all of these things. And you write down evidence. You build another whole window frame that you're looking out. You say, this is actually believable as well. Now, consider for a moment, what we've done is we've tried to step out of the situation and you've tried to look at it from 3 different ways so far. One, you've tried to look at it from the original frame. I'm not good enough for him. Then we built evidence for it to believe it. And you've gotten to a place of saying, okay, I can actually believe that. Then we turn the corner, we move to the other window frame. And the other window frame says, he's not good enough for me. Then we built evidence to be able to believe that. Once you get to the place where you start to believe it, then we're like, okay, awesome. We've switched the idea and the thought process from the first to the second. Now we're going to switch it to the third, which is the opposite of the original. So you have the original story, I'm not good enough for him. Then you have the opposite, I am good enough for him. And then you build all of your evidence there. All we're trying to get you to do is look through different window frames to see different perspectives. That right now, if you only focus on the original story, you won't see anything else. So if I try to tell you, hey, what's the story you're telling yourself? And you say that, and I'm like, well, what should you tell yourself? You're like, well, I should think better about myself. Like it won't connect. It won't be the same level, the depth of getting you what you actually want, which is what we focus on next. So we've talked through the original, we built the evidence. We've talked through the me version, we built the evidence. We talked through the opposite version, and we built the evidence. Now we need to sit down and actually just write out, what do you want? Like at the end of the day, when the dust settles, when everything clears, what do you actually want for you? What does it look like for you? This is where you just have to get really clear. And it feels awkward at first because you haven't been allowed to want anything. It's not something that you've been allowed to share your feelings, your desires, your needs, your wants. You haven't been allowed to. And so sitting at this is going to take some time to figure out what is it that you actually want. And it's not dependent on him. It's not dependent on anyone else. It's what do you want for you? What does that actually look like for you? Not involving someone else, but just involving you. What does that actually look like? Now you might be thinking, man, it is so hard to know what I want. So I want you to consider this really quick because it's an interesting concept. If you knew what you wanted and then you got everything you wanted, then the only thing that would compel you forward would be figuring out what you want. It's going to be a never-ending cycle. So the more you embrace the piece of feeling uncomfortable with not knowing what you want and moving forward to figure out what you want, the more you're able to actually be free. Mentally and emotionally to move forward in the healing process and the mindset that's going to help liberate you once and for all. So we've looked at the original, we've looked at the me version, we've looked at the opposite version, and then you write down all the things you want. From there, you're going to take what you want and you're going to create what is the desired story. Like, what's the desired story that you actually want for you? So it might be, in this case, talking about your worth and your value not dependent on him anymore. It could simply be, I know my worth and my value and it's not dependent on him. Regardless of how he treats me, my value is more than what he tries to define me as. There's millions of different stories, and I can't even express all of them. It's just trying to give you a perspective of, then you move to what you want and then the desired story. This is what starts to give you clarity, because it lets you actually pull out of the situation that you're in, and it lets you focus on different pieces, and it shifts your mindset, shifts your mind frame, so that you're not stuck in a certain version of the story, but you're actually looking at different versions of the story. Now, if you're listening to this and it makes sense, I want you just to leave a comment, or if you have questions, leave a comment, or if it's like, hey, this is actually helpful for you, leave a comment, because I want to be able to hear from you, especially on this video, because this is trying to teach a frame and a modality that hasn't always been out there and hasn't always been focused on, of you getting crystal clear on what you're actually telling yourself, building evidence so you believe it, turning the corner and then believing it when you flip it around, and when you flip the person you around, and building evidence and believing it, moving around to the next side and flipping it around from the opposite of the original, building evidence, then believing it, scripting out what you want, and then creating your own desired story. That version of reality that you actually want, that you can actually go after, versus being stuck in the stories that you're telling yourself. If I can help you personally with this, then go to rawmotivations.com, book a call. Would love to be able to talk to you today to help you move forward in your healing, your growth, and your transformation.